The water came down behind us with a sound that had stopped being a sound an hour ago and become a pressure instead. Something felt in the teeth and the sternum, and I held the torch out into the dark with my arm shaking from more than the cold. The stairs went down. Not a ledge, not a crack a man could squeeze through and call a passage. Stairs, 11 of them that I could count before the torchlight gave up. Each one cut square into rock that had no business being cut at all, worn in the center of each tread, the way a church step wears, the way a threshold wears after 10,000 boots, and there wasn't a boot for 200 miles that wasn't ours. I said his name. I don't think I said anything after that. He came up beside me with the sharps still slung and his hat dripping, and he didn't say a word for a long time, just looked down into where the light didn't reach, and I watched something cross his face that I'd only seen once before, on a riverbank in the Sierra Nevada 6 years gone, when a man he loved went underwater and didn't come up in the place he went under. "We go back," he said. I told him we'd come 4 days off the known trail for this. 11 days total, I said, like the number itself was an argument. He didn't answer that. He looked at the stairs. Behind us, the fall kept its noise going. 90 feet of creek pouring into a stone bowl that had swallowed the whole width of a mountain stream like it was nothing, like it did this every day of every year, going back further than either of us had numbers for. And it seemed to me right then that whatever built these steps had known that sound the way we knew our own breathing, had lived with it, had maybe worshipped it, and had walked down into the dark past it 1,000 times before either of our grandfathers were born. He put his hand flat on my chest, not hard, just enough. "Not tonight," he said. "Maybe not ever. But if we go slow, and we go together. And the first sign of trouble, we're back up these steps before you've finished thinking about it. I want to tell it right, so I have to go back before this. Back past the falls and the stairs and the thing we found at the bottom of them. Back to a trading post and a trapper with a bad eye, and a story he probably told to every fool who bought him a drink. Back 11 days on foot, with $41 between us and a rifle we shared, and a father neither one of us had stopped missing. Because none of it makes sense unless you understand how two brothers with nothing came to be standing in that spray at dusk, staring down into a staircase, older than any account of this country, wondering which one of us would go first. We'd left Fort Bridger's country behind on a Thursday, the 2nd day of September, 1871, with our packs weighed out at 31 pounds apiece, and a hand-drawn map that wasn't worth the paper it was scratched on. My brother carried the sharp-slung muzzle down against the rain that hadn't started yet but would. I carried the axe and the journal and the tin cup, and between the two of us we carried $41, most of it in silver, sewn into a boot heel, because a man at the last trading post had looked at us too long. That trading post sat at the mouth of a dry wash below the Wind River Divide, a low log building with a sod roof, and a sign that only said goods, and it was there we met the trapper. He had one eye gone milky and the other sharp as a tack, and he'd been drinking off another man's credit for 3 days by the look of him. My brother bought him 2 fingers of whiskey for the price of a story, and the story was this. 4 days west of the known trail, maybe 5, there was a creek that ran strong out of the high snowfields and then simply stopped existing. Swallowed whole, he said, by a falls that dropped into a bowl of stone so deep no man had ever thrown a rope to the bottom of it and gotten an answer back. We should have let it go. We had $11 less than we'd started the season with. Our flour was down to 6 pounds, and our coffee was gone to grounds we'd already boiled twice. But my brother had a way of going quiet when something caught him, and he went quiet then, turning his cup in his hands while the trapper talked. And I knew before we left that post, we were walking west instead of south, toward the railroad towns where a man could still find winter work. 11 days on foot through country that climbed 1,000 feet before it let you rest. We shot a mule deer on the 4th day and made it last 5 more. We forded 2 creeks cold enough to numb a man to the knee, and camped one whole day out because the sky turned the color of a gun barrel, and my brother said we'd wait it out, rather than get caught above timberline in it. He kept the journal most nights, short lines by firelight, miles made, water crossed, game seen, the same steady hand our father used to keep before the Sierra took him. By the 11th day, we were down to biscuit crumbs and a half-pound of bacon rind, following a creek that ran faster and colder the higher we climbed, listening for something that sounded less like water and more like a held breath about to be let go. We had counted the money twice before we left the trading post, the way we always did when a decision needed weight behind it. $41, folded into a square of oilcloth and kept in the bottom of my brother's pack, under the biscuit tin and the spare flannel. Neither of us liked spending from it. We'd earned most of it splitting rails for a rancher outside Lander, 2 bits an hour, 6 weeks of blistered palms, and we both knew it was meant to carry us through to whatever winter work we found in the railroad towns, not to feed a detour into country that had no name on any map either of us had seen. My pack came to 31 pounds that morning, weighed rough on a trading post scale before we set out. Flour, bacon rind, a tin of matches, the hand axe, my share of the shells. His came heavier, closer to 40, on account of the sharps and the journal, and the coil of rope we'd bought off a freighter for $1.10. We carried the rifle between us the way we carried most things. One man's turn to bear it and the other's turn to rest. And neither of us said aloud what we were both thinking, which was that one rifle and 40-some shells was a thin margin against a mountain range in September. The season was turning. You could feel it in the mornings, the way the frost held longer on the grass, the way the aspen on the lower slopes had gone the color of an old coin. My brother didn't say much about it. He looked at the sky more than he used to, and once, on the 6th day, he stopped on a ridge and studied the peaks to the north for a long while, before he said only, 4 more days, like it was a fact and not a decision, though it was both. I asked him once on the 8th night why we didn't turn south while there was still time to make the towns before the passes closed. He was quiet a while, feeding twigs into the fire one at a time, and then he said the trapper's directions were the kind a man didn't get twice. That some things you heard about once in your life, and if you didn't go look, you carried the not knowing the rest of your days. I understood him better than he thought. I'd watched him carry that kind of not knowing before, about our father, about the river that took him, and I understood that this was never only about water swallowing a creek whole. It was about a man who needed to see something the world hadn't already explained to him. So we kept climbing, rationing the bacon rind into strips no thicker than a finger, watching the sky, listening to that creek grow louder and stranger above us with every mile. We came up out of a stand of dwarfed spruce on the 11th day, a Thursday by my brother's count, though I'd lost track myself somewhere around the 6th, and the ground had gone from soil to bare granite so fast it was like walking off the edge of the known world onto something older. The sound had been building all afternoon, not loud so much as constant, a pressure against the ears that made us stop talking without either of us saying to stop. By the time the light started going amber and then gray, we came around a shoulder of rock and there it was. 90 feet, near as I could judge it, though standing at the bottom looking up, a man loses all sense of scale. The water came off a lip of stone so smooth it looked poured rather than worn, and it fell without breaking apart the way I'd expected, a single sheet of white-gray going to mist about 2/3 down, and below it, a bowl carved into the rock itself, dark and round and full of a green so deep it looked black at the edges. The cold coming off it reached us 30 yards out. My brother didn't say anything. He set his pack down slow, like a man setting down something that might still be alive, and just looked. I remember thinking about the trapper at the post, how he'd said the water swallows the creek whole, and thinking that was near enough the truth, because the creek didn't reappear anywhere below that bowl that we could see. It just went into the stone and stayed there. We made camp on a shelf of rock 40 feet back from the spray, close enough to feel it on our faces if the wind shifted. And I remember the cold of that mist, different from ordinary cold, wetter, older somehow, working into the wool of my coat in a way that made me pull it tighter without deciding to. My brother built the fire smaller than usual, like he didn't want the sound of it competing with the falls. I was the one who noticed it, not him, and I've turned that over in my mind more than once since, why it was me and not him, when he was always the one who saw further, who decided faster. But I was watching the spray where it hit the pool, the way it fans out even in the dark if you look long enough, silver against black, and there was a place near the base, low and to the left, where the rock shelved out, where the pattern broke, not much, a gap in the fan, a seam where the mist thinned and curled inward instead of out, like it was being pulled toward the rock instead of away from it. I said his name, quiet, and pointed, and he came and crouched beside me and looked where I was looking, for a long time before he said anything at all. Tomorrow was all he said, and pulled back from the edge like the rock might tell him something he wasn't ready to hear yet. I didn't argue. There's a way he gets quiet that isn't the same as thinking, and I've learned to leave it alone until it passes on its own. We ate what was left of the salt pork, not much, and he fed the fire 2 more sticks and no more. And for a while neither of us said anything, just listened to the falls the way you'd listen to a man breathing in the next room. Then he asked me if I remembered the Kern River, and I said some, though I was 9, and most of what I have is pieces, the color of the water, which was not blue and not green but something between, and the sound our father's boots made on the gravel bar before he stepped in. He told it slower than I'd ever heard him tell anything, said our father had crossed worse water than that 12 times and never thought twice, said the current there didn't look like much from the bank, said that's the kind that takes men, not the kind that announces itself. Said he watched him go under once, come up, go under again, and that the second time was different from the first, in a way he still couldn't put into words, only that he knew before he knew, if that makes any sense at all. He said that, for a week after, he couldn't sleep near creeks, couldn't stand a kettle boiling too hard, anything that made that particular sound water makes when it's moving with force behind it. He looked at the falls when he said it, not at me. 6 years, and he said the sound had never once sat easy with him since. Not this size, not any size. A rain barrel over full was enough some nights to put him back on that gravel bar. Said he hadn't told me because there wasn't a way to tell it. That didn't sound like a man asking to be talked out of his own caution, and he didn't want to be talked out of it. Not by me, not by anybody, because his caution was the only thing standing between us and doing something a fool would do. I asked him why he'd told me now. He said because tomorrow we were going to walk into a wall of falling water on purpose, and he wanted me to understand it wasn't nothing to him, wasn't just cold and wet and inconvenient, that every step toward that gap in the mist was a step he was going to have to take past something, and he wanted it said once, plain, before we did it, so that if his hand shook it wouldn't be a mystery to either of us why. Then he banked the fire lower still and lay down with his back to it, and I sat up a while longer watching that seam in the spray, silver and black, thinning and pulling inward, patient as anything that old ground has ever been. Morning came gray and slow, the mist off the falls hanging lower than it had at dusk, like the whole basin was reluctant to let the night go. My brother was already up when I opened my eyes, standing at the edge of the gravel bar with his hands in his coat pockets, looking at the water the way a man looks at a debt he means to pay that day. We ate cold biscuit and didn't talk much. There wasn't much to say after what he'd told me. I kept expecting him to take it back somehow, to make it smaller in the daylight than it had been by the fire, but he didn't. He just rolled his blanket tight and checked the Sharps' action and said we ought to look along the base of the falls before we tried the gap, see what the water had brought down over however many years it had been falling. It was my brother who found it, wedged between two rocks, maybe 30 feet from where the spray came down hardest, half buried in silt that had gone hard as clay, a length of iron, thick as my thumb, rusted to the color of dried blood. He worked it loose with his boot heel and a good deal of patience, and when it came free, it weighed more than I expected, and longer too, near 2 feet, tapered at one end, like something meant to be driven. A spike, somebody's spike, caught against it, snagged on a burr where the metal had bent, was a scrap of canvas gone stiff and dark with oil and age, no bigger than a bandana, torn along one edge like it had been ripped rather than cut. There was lettering on it once. We could still make out the ghost of it, a few strokes that might have been an H or might have been nothing, the rest gone to whatever the years and the water had decided to take. My brother turned the spike over in his hands, and that was when he saw it, scratched into the flat of the head, shallow but deliberate, done with something sharper than a knife point and a steadier hand than the mountain would give most men. Letters, a name, or the start of one. He held it up to the gray light and read it out slow, like he didn't trust his own eyes. And I won't say the name here because it didn't mean anything to either of us then. Just 5 letters, and a gouge where a 6th might have gone, unfinished or worn away. Somebody's kit, he said. Somebody worked this ground before us. He didn't say it like a discovery. He said it like a warning, turning the spike over once more before he set it down on a flat rock. Careful, the way you'd set down something that still belonged to somebody, even after all this time. We didn't go behind the falls that morning. We waited, because my brother said the light mattered, and he was right about most things that had to do with reading a place before you trusted it. So we ate hardtack and dried venison on a boulder above the pool, watching the sun climb over the eastern wall of the bowl, and around noon it came down through a notch in the rock at an angle that turned the spray gold and lit up the back of the falls like a lamp behind a curtain. That was when we saw it wasn't a solid wall of water and stone. There was a gap. My brother went first, same as always. He waded into the pool up to his waist, the cold coming up through his boots like it had opinions about him being there, and I followed with the rifle held over my head, wrapped in oilcloth, because he'd told me a long time ago that you don't let water near the one thing that keeps you alive. The roar swallowed everything. I couldn't hear my own boots scrape the stones underneath. Couldn't hear him call back to me. Just watched the set of his shoulders and went where he went. Behind the sheet of falling water, the air changed, cooler, and it smelled of wet stone, and something older than wet stone, something like the inside of a cellar that's never had a door. My brother put his hand flat against the rock wall and felt his way along it, and I saw him stop, and I saw his hand go still. There was an opening, man height, maybe a little more, cut clean into the rock, the edges too even for anything a river could have done in 10,000 years of trying. I came up beside him and looked past his shoulder, and that's when I saw the steps. They went down into the dark, 6 of them that I could count before the light gave out. Each one worn smooth in the middle where feet had come down, again and again. Generations of feet, more than any one prospector working a claim could have made in a lifetime of digging. The edges of each step were still sharp where the wear hadn't reached. Chisel marks, faint, running along the risers like somebody had wanted it done right and had the time to do it. My brother didn't say anything for a long while. He just stood there with his hand still on the wall, water sliding off his hat brim, looking at those steps the way a man looks at a debt he didn't know he owed. Finally he said that spike wasn't the first thing anybody found in these rocks. And I understood, standing there soaked to the bone in that cold gray light, that we had come looking for a waterfall that swallowed a creek, and found something that had been swallowing men a great deal longer than that. We went down slow, one step at a time. My brother first with the rifle held crosswise, and me behind with the tin cup rattling soft against my pack. the only sound besides the water that kept dripping through cracks somewhere above us. The air changed as we went. It got warmer, which didn't make sense to me until I stopped and thought about it. How the rock must hold heat, different than the open sky. How a place cut this far into the mountain wouldn't know about September or any season at all. 6 steps became 10, became a landing wide enough for both of us to stand without touching, and past that, the passage opened up sudden into a room I hadn't expected, low-ceilinged, wider than our cabin back before we lost it, and my brother's match flared and caught on a scrap of dry moss he'd carried down for just that reason. The walls were black, not shadowed black, but black from fire. Soot, gone into the stone so deep no rain had ever reached it to wash it out. Whoever burned their fires here had burned them for a long time, long enough to leave a mark that outlasted them. Along one wall there were remnants of something woven, fiber gone brittle and gray, curled up on itself like a dead leaf. And when I crouched to look closer, my brother said, "Don't touch it," and I didn't, though I wanted to. There was a platform near the back, low, maybe knee-height, made of flat stones fitted together with a care that surprised me more than the steps had. It wasn't a wall that had fallen into that shape by accident. Somebody had built it to be exactly that height, exactly that flat. For some purpose I couldn't guess at standing there, with water still running off my sleeves. My brother turned the match slow in a circle, so the light swept the room, and neither of us said anything for a spell. I kept thinking about the spike up above, the scratched name, the canvas gone to rot, and how small that felt now. One man's grave marker, sitting at the doorstep of something that had been here, before his grandfather was born, before anybody's grandfather, that either of us had ever heard of. "This isn't a mine," I said finally, just to hear a voice that wasn't the water. "No," my brother said, "it never was." He crouched by the platform and set his palm flat on the stone, the way he'd done on the wall above, like he was asking it something it wasn't going to answer. The match burned down close to his fingers and he let it go dark rather than light. Another. And for a moment we stood there in the black, listening to the water find its way through the rock, somewhere far off, patient, the way it had probably been finding its way for longer than either of us could put a number to. He struck another match after all, cupping it against the draft, and we went on past the platform to where the passage narrowed and dropped a little, the ceiling coming down close enough that my brother had to duck his head. The rock changed there. It stopped being smooth-cut, the way the stairs and the walls had been, and turned rough, broken, the kind of ceiling that's fallen rather than been shaped. Chunks of stone lay heaped across the floor, some the size of a stove, and wedged among them, catching the matchlight in a way that didn't belong to any of it, was a length of rusted iron, a drill bit, the kind a man swings a hammer against, and near it the remains of a canvas pack, gone to threads and mildew, the straps rotted through, the shape of it collapsed flat like something had let the air out of it. My brother held the match lower. There were bones under the fallen rock, not scattered, not disturbed by animals, pinned, the way a man's leg gets pinned when a wall comes down on him, and he can't do anything but wait. A boot, cracked and curled at the toe, still laced. A hand, or what the years had left of one, still curved around the haft of a short pick, like he'd meant to swing it one more time. Neither of us moved for a while. "He was looking for something," I said. "He found it," my brother said, and nodded at the wall the man had been working when it let go. A seam of quartz, pale even in the poor light, veined through with something that might have been worth a year's wages if a man could have carried it out, and might have been worth nothing at all. It didn't matter now. The rock hadn't cared what color the seam was. It had come down the same either way. I thought about the spike above, the name scratched crooked into the iron, and understood now that it hadn't been a marker somebody else left for him. He'd driven it himself on his way in, the way a man leaves a note pinned to a door, back soon, or maybe just so he could find his own way out again in the dark. He never got the chance to pull it. My brother crouched at the edge of the rockfall and looked at the bones a long moment without touching them, the way you'd look at a man sleeping that you didn't want to wake. "How long, you figure?" I asked. "Long enough nobody came looking," he said. "Or somebody did, and quit." Above us, faint, under the water's steady voice, I thought I heard something else start up. A low change in the sound, a deepening, like the falls themselves had shifted their pitch. My brother heard it too. He lifted his head toward the passage we'd come down, toward the stairs and the light we couldn't see from here, and went still, in the particular way he went still, when something in the weather had changed, and hadn't told us yet why. I said it before I'd decided to say it. There's more here. Got to be. Man doesn't dig this deep for nothing. My brother didn't look at me. He was still watching the dark above the stairs. Man doesn't dig this deep for nothing, and this is where it got him. We're not him. No, he said, we ain't. I went to the edge of the rock fall anyway, put my hand on a slab the size of a wagon bed, and felt for the give in it, the way you'd test ice. There was a gap under the near corner, black and narrow, wide enough for an arm, maybe a shoulder if a man turned sideways and didn't mind what he couldn't see. I told him I could feel a draft coming off it, cooler than the rest, and a draft meant space, and space meant the passage kept going past where the stone had let go. "Get your hand out of there," he said. "I'm only feeling. I heard you the first time." He came over and crouched beside me, and for a moment I thought he was going to look for himself, weigh it the way he weighed everything, slow and quiet before he ruled. Instead, he put 2 fingers against the rock face, just above the gap, and held them there. "Feel that," he said. I did. A trickle, thin as a hair, running cold over my knuckles, where a minute before there'd been only stone dust and dry air. "Rain," he said. "Somewhere up top, coming down through cracks we can't see." He stood. Same as before, same as the river. "This ain't a river. It's water finding the low place. It don't care what we call it." The trickle became a thread, and the thread found a seam in the rock and started to run instead of drip, and somewhere below us, deep in the dark past the bones and past the gap I'd had my hand in, I heard the same low change I'd heard before, closer now, a sound like a held breath finally let out. My brother had my arm before I'd finished hearing it. "Now," he said, "we go now." I looked once more at the gap, at the dark beyond it that might have held anything, gold or nothing, and I understood in that half-second the way you understand a thing only after it's already decided itself, that I would never know, and that not knowing was the price, and that my brother had already paid a price like it once, on a riverbank in the Sierras, and wasn't going to pay it twice, not with me. The water was at our boots. He pulled and I went, and behind us the passage that had waited 100 years or more for someone to ask it a question began, quietly, to answer instead, in the only language it had ever needed. We came up through the stair 2 at a time, my brother's hand still locked on my sleeve like he didn't trust the rock to hold me on my own, and the noise behind us had turned from a held breath into something closer to a shout, water finding its old shape after 100 years of being told no. The last dozen steps were already running like a mill race, thin and cold and rising, and I felt it climb my boots to my ankles to my shins in the time it took to get to the mouth of the passage. And then we were out, into the roar and the spray and the gray evening light, and I understood the trickle we'd heard down below hadn't been the storm arriving. It had been the storm already here, hours of it, filling the bowl above us, and finding every crack it could pour through. The rain had come on hard while we were under, the kind of rain that doesn't announce itself so much as simply exist all at once. And the falls had swollen fat and brown with runoff, twice the width I remembered from 3 days before, hammering into the stone bowl, until the spray reached us where we stood shaking on the ledge. We watched the passage mouth behind the sheet of water go under, Inch by inch, the dark opening swallowed the way a man's face goes under in current. Not fast, not slow, just steadily, until there was only falling water, where there had been a door into the mountain. My brother didn't say anything for a while. He was breathing like he'd run a mile, and so was I, and neither of us moved to build a fire, though the cold had gotten into both of us past the point of comfort. Then he crouched at the base of the rocks where we'd left our packs, and dug the iron spike out from where I'd carried it, wrapped in the scrap of oiled canvas, and he held it a moment in his two hands, like it weighed more than it did. He didn't ask me. He found a gap between two boulders at the foot of the falls, out of reach of the worst of the spray, and he set the spike down into it and packed stones around it until it stood upright, canvas and all, a marker no different to look at than any other stone in that country, unless a man already knew to look. I didn't argue, and I didn't help beyond handing him the rocks. It seemed like a thing that needed one pair of hands doing it, and mine had already been in the dark long enough for one day. We came down out of the high country 9 days after that, and it was a Tuesday, the 2nd of October, 1871, when we stood again in the low room of the trading post, where the trapper had first told us of a creek that swallowed itself whole. The same man who'd sold us flour and lead was behind the counter, and he looked at us the way men look at drifters who've come back thinner than they left. We didn't tell him what was behind the falls. My brother asked for the ledger, the same one the post kept for claims and sightings, and he wrote in it himself, in a hand steadier than I expected from him, that there was a falls in the Wind River country, roughly 90 feet, 4 days off the marked trail past the forks, and that the water dropped into a stone bowl worth seeing. Nothing about a staircase, nothing about what waited under it. He signed no claim beneath it, because there was nothing there to claim, not in the way the word is usually meant. We spent $11 that week on new boot leather and a sack of beans, and what was left of the 41 we'd started with came to $19 and some cents, which my brother counted twice before he put it away. I've turned the thing over more times than I can count since then. The way a man will turn a stone he's carried a long way without ever deciding to throw it. What I've settled on, if settling is the word, is that some places aren't put in front of a man to be taken from. They're put there to be seen, and left, and carried out only as a thing you know, rather than a thing you own. My brother understood that before I did. He always saw the shape of a thing before I saw the thing itself. We never went back. I think about the spike some winters, standing in its gap between the boulders, doing the only work it has left to do, which is to tell whoever finds it that somebody came before and somebody after, and neither one took what wasn't theirs. That's the whole of it, near as I can tell it true. If you've got a brother or a sister or whoever it is you'd walk 11 days into strange country with and trust to make the last call when it mattered, hold on to that. It's worth more than what's under any waterfall. If this found you, we'd be glad to have you along for the next one. Subscribe if you want more of these, and tell us in the comments about the one person you'd have followed into the dark.